Mesdames et messieurs, bonjour. Nous sommes dans l'émission Il faut qu'on discute sur la chaîne Esprit critique, Esprit logique de François Carlier. Aujourd'hui, nous allons interroger un chercheur américain sur l'assassinat du président Kennedy qui s'appelle Michael Griffith. Et l'interview, bien sûr, aura lieu en anglais. Okay, Mr. Griffith, well, good morning for you, good afternoon for us. Hello. Mr. Griffith, you are a Kennedy assassination researcher, very well known. You've been well known for 20 years. I read about you online, and you seem to have more university degrees than I can count. And and also you were in the military. You'll tell us about that. And you're here because I asked you, and I thank you for agreeing. I asked you to be a guest for an interview on the Kennedy assassination. This is not going to be a debate. This is intended to be an interview of a well-known researcher. You've been a researcher for, like, as I said, more than 20 years. You've been well known at the beginning of the internet boom. There used to be news groups. They started then, and at the time there was one that was moderated by Mr. John McAdams, and there was another one, well-known news group. I don't remember the exact name, and you became well-known, as at least to me, at the time, and you were a very prolific writer, and that is going to be interesting listening to you tell us about all of that. As usual, I will ask you 4 questions. The first question is going to be, can you introduce yourself, your journey into the Kennedy assassination? If I'm not mistaken, you started with the JFK movie by Oliver Stone. You'll tell us about that. Your journey, where you went, what books you read, whatever people you met, researchers, the conversations you had. That is going to be interesting. And the second question will be, what conclusions have you reached after studying the case thoroughly? What conclusions have you reached? Of course, the follow-up question will be, what arguments do you have and can you put forth to support your conclusions? And the last question will be, do you have any anecdotes, people you met who told you, interesting items or things? That is going to be interesting too. And of course, on the course of the conversation, I may have, questions, and in the end, I will, obviously, I will ask you questions about, the Zapruder film, David Lifton, the J.D. Tippit murder, or any question that may arise. Okay. Good morning to you, and who are you, Mr. Griffith?
Okay, well, I am Mike Griffith, and as you mentioned, I became interested in the Kennedy assassination after I saw Oliver Stone's movie JFK. Before that time, I totally accepted the official version. I believed Oswald had done it. I didn't think there was any doubt about it. I thought it was obvious because I was only looking at the surface evidence. And if you look at the surface of the surface case against Oswald looks overwhelming. It's only when you dig a little bit and you find out that surface it falls apart under scrutiny. But anyway, I was in the intelligence field in the Army for 21 years, so I went to see the movie JFK just out of raw curiosity because I'd heard so much about it on the radio. At the time, I was stationed at Fort Devens, Massachusetts, and that's about 40 miles west of Boston. And I was just curious, and I was blown away by the movie. I remember thinking to myself, if half of this is true, if even only half of this is true, this is incredible. Now, of course, I realize now that the movie has many flaws. Unfortunately, he relied on a guy by the name of L. Fletcher Prouty, who I think was a genuine crackpot. But anyway, so that's so after I saw the movie, I started reading anything that I could get my hands on the case. I read in. Now, of course, you have to remember that this was early '90s, and the internet really hadn't gotten started yet. It was just in its infancy, and so I couldn't just go online and start searching for stuff. I went to bookstores, and I got all the books on the case I could find. So I read Gerald Posner's Case Closed. I read the Harrison Livingston books. I read David Lifton's book. I read Jim Marr's book Crossfire, and a bunch of others. I essentially any book on the case that I could find in catalogs or whatever, or just by going to bookstores, I obtained. And I guess after I began to examine the case. Now, of course, I was in the Army, so I had to fire for a rifle qualification every year, and so I knew a fair amount about marksmanship and about when you're shooting, if you're shooting from an elevation, that requires a different approach than if you're shooting on a level surface at a target that's essentially level with you, and so I should also add that I read the Warren Report. I read the volumes. Eventually, it took me a while because there are a lot of them, and I was really struck by the commission's own rifle test that they arranged through the Army, where they had 3 master rated marksmen. Now, the master rating, that's an NRA rating. That is way higher than any skill rating in the military. In the military, you have marksman. That's the lowest. You have sharpshooter. You have expert. I qualified at all 3 levels, and so there were 3 of these master rated marksmen, and they were using Oswald's alleged rifle. They were using the same rifle that Oswald allegedly used, and they were firing at stationary targets. And from only 30 feet up, Oswald, he would have had to fire from 60 feet up. They were allowed to take as much time as they wanted for their first shot, okay, which is a luxury Oswald would not have had. And as a marksman myself, I knew, okay, those conditions were a lot easier than the conditions that Oswald would have faced if he'd been doing the shooting. So, and even then, they most of their shots, all but a few, missed the head and neck area of the target boards. And these were master rated riflemen, and in fact, a couple of them had been in competitions just a few years earlier, and so these were really highly skilled shooters. And that was the first thing that really caused me to doubt that Oswald even had the skills needed to do what he allegedly did. And then when I read about his marksmanship scores in the Marine Corps, He barely qualified in the second level. At his best day in the range, he qualified as a sharpshooter. And now you have to keep in mind that, you know, in the military, when you qualify, when you shoot for qualification, you've already had a lot of time to practice on the same targets, and you know where the targets are. You might not know which ones are coming up, but I mean, you've practiced against all the targets in your range field. And plus, he was using a semi-automatic rifle. So in other words, he didn't have a bolt that he had to work. That makes a huge difference. If you've ever fired a semi-automatic where you can just squeeze a trigger, and then you tried to shoot that same range using a bolt action, it's much more difficult. And so I looked at his rifle scores and I was like, you got to be kidding me. There's no way this guy, even if you assume that the shooting took 11 seconds, he would have had to go 2 for 2 in 5.6 seconds after the limousine cleared the oak tree. He was up in the 6th floor. There was an oak tree that obscured his view. It basically blocked it. And then he would have had to wait until, you know, JFK came into view after he passed under the oak tree. At that point, he would have only had 5.6 seconds. So even if you want to push the shooting back to 11 seconds, you want to assume that he fired it like Z-150 in the Zapruder film. Now, another issue that I have with that scenario is that if in order to assume this, you'd have to assume that he missed his first, closest, and easiest shot by a mile. I mean, he didn't even hit the limousine. Okay, and again, I was like, that's just wildly implausible. That the same guy who, you know, he misses the entire limo on his easiest shot, his closest shot, but yet he goes 2 for 2 in 5.6 seconds using a bolt action rifle that had a difficult bolt and the sights weren't even aligned. Well, the scope wasn't even properly aligned. So that's a little bit about my journey, and just in terms of the basics.
Okay. Do you allow for the possibility for the bullet to have hit either the branch of a tree or the lamppost?
Okay. Yes, I've heard those theories. Okay. One, he would have seen. I mean, one, you'd have to assume that he fired at a point when in his scope he saw some branches. Why would you fire at that point? That makes no sense.
Good point.
Also, the lamppost. Okay. Again, if he's aiming, he's got his scope, you know. All right, and then he's going to fire when he sees a lamppost right in the middle of his scope, or at least any point close to the center of scope. Okay, nobody in their right mind would fire in that situation. Anyway, so yes.
Okay, and so what conclusions have you reached? You know, because I forgot to mention, but we'll mention it later. You have written a book yourself, and so what conclusions have you reached?
Okay, well, yes, I am certain that there were multiple gunmen. I don't see any way that one individual, even a world-class marksman, could have pulled this off. Given the events that we see in the Zapruder film, where there clearly, I mean, even the House Select Committee on Assassinations acknowledged that there was a shot fired before the limousine passed underneath the oak tree. Okay, and there's some clear indications in the film of this. You see Governor Connolly, he whips his head over to the right, and you see there's a girl running along the side of the limousine on the grass, and she starts to slow down markedly. I mean, you see her really start to slow herself down, and she stops. She turns to look back toward the rear, and as an adult, she explained that she stopped because she heard a loud noise behind her, and this occurs well before JFK passed behind the freeway sign. Okay, and so there's a shot. There's a shot that occurs before he's behind the freeway sign. But the most important thing about this is that shot that was fired before the freeway sign was fired when Oswald's view, if he were the shooter, if he was the shooter, his view would have been blocked by the oak tree at that time, because that shot occurred at around frame 185, 188, 189. And so, and just after that shot is fired, well, just after you see the reactions to that shot, JFK's hand, his waving motion suddenly freezes. He starts to bring his hand toward his throat. The split second that you see him reemerge from the sign, you can see his left hand is coming up toward his throat. So clearly, and also Jackie Kennedy is staring right. I mean, she stopped everything she's doing. She's turned and she's looking intently at him as she comes out from behind the sign in 224. And so obviously he was hit long before he comes out from behind the sign. All right, and this is long before. I mean, even if you want to assume that Governor Connolly was hit at Z224, well, obviously JFK was hit well before that. He was hit in the 190s, and so that right there destroys the single bullet theory. And so, all right, so multiple gunmen. I believe that it's clear that Jack Ruby was, that his shooting of Oswald was not some spontaneous rage reaction, but it was a carefully planned hit. He didn't get into the basement by the Main Street ramp. He had to have gone into a side door, and then somebody would have had to let him in, or at least leave that door unlocked. I think it's obvious that the autopsy photos and X-rays have been altered. We have some hard science on the X-rays thanks to the research of Dr. David Mantic and Dr. Michael Chesser and others who have done optical density measurements on the X-rays, and there's a white patch on the lateral X-rays that simply is impossible on a normal X-ray. And I won't go into all the technicalities, and Dr. Mantic and Dr. Chesser have there have been some amateurish attempts to explain those measurements, and they are, I think they're just that. They're just very amateurish, and Dr. Mantic and Dr. Chesser have answered them, as have others. I think that the Zapruder film was altered, and we have some decent anecdotal evidence of this, but we also I think there's been some very convincing film analysis of the film from a scientific point of view that proves that there are things in the film that just could not happen on this planet. And so they're, but anyway, but I should add that I think that those who altered the film, they were only able to alter it so much. And I think they decided at the end of the day that even their final product was unacceptable, because even the current film in its current state shows reactions to 6 shots, either shots or shots that were hits. For example, and this is one of the most obvious. It's the second most obvious reaction in the Zapruder film, yet it has been virtually ignored. The Warren Commission ignored it. House Select Committee ignored it. Basically ignored it, and that is starting at Z226. You see JFK suddenly jolted forward. I mean, he's knocked forward like this. His hands fly up. Okay, so obviously something has hit him. I mean, something, your body just doesn't do this for no reason. And I think that was the back shot, and I think that the earlier shot, the one that came before the freeway sign, I think that was the throat shot, the shot that entered the throat, which is, I think that's why he was reaching at his throat. He felt pain in his throat. When you're hurt, your natural reaction is to reach toward the source of the pain. Okay. You never saw him, trying to reach to his back. Now, as for who was behind the assassination, who were the players, I think that there are indications of who was behind it. I don't think there's any really hard evidence of it. And I don't like to speculate if there's no evidence, even if it sounds exotic and exciting theory. I think there's been way too much of that in the research community, where they have these just exotic, wild theories about who was behind this. I think that our best evidence points to elements of the mafia who obviously had a very strong motive, and we had recordings of some mafia guys who were talking about having him shot before the assassination, and we have some credible accounts of 2 mafia dons admitting afterward that that the mafia, or that they played a role in the shooting. I think that there is quite a bit of evidence that points to rogue elements of the CIA, and I think it's really important to stress the word rogue. I think that this was limited to the people who were involved in the anti-Castro operations, who were understandably, they were furious at JFK over the Bay of Pigs. And it's interesting, if you watch interviews with some of those folks, I mean, even years later, they were still, you could see the anger in their eyes and in their countenance, and see the anger as they talked about how they felt he betrayed them. So I think that as far as the cover up, I think that there were elements of the military who were involved. I think they were ordered to do it. I think they were told this was a matter of national security, and if we don't do this, a bunch of people are going to die in a nuclear war. And so and we know that there was a gag order imposed on everybody at the autopsy. That's a matter of record. But you know what? I don't. I don't know who was the prime mover. Was it elements in the military who approached the CIA and the mafia, say, hey, we got to get rid of this guy. He's doing this, doing that. He's going to sell us out to the Soviets. Blah blah blah. Or was it elements in the CIA who went to the military and the mafia, or did the mafia approach the CIA and did the CIA approach the military? I don't know, and I just don't think it does any good to speculate far beyond what the evidence indicates. I don't think there's any evidence that actually proves any of this. In terms of, it's obvious, you can't deny it. I think that there are indications. Some of them are very good indications, very credible indications. William Harvey, I think there's some good evidence that he was involved, and he, there's no secret, he hated the Kennedys with a passion. And he had some interesting travels on the day of at the time of the assassination. And so that's multiple gunmen. I think there was alteration of some of the medical evidence and the Zapruder film. And I think there are indications that we're talking about rogue elements of the CIA and rogue elements of the military and elements of the mafia. But in terms of identifying gunmen in the plaza, I think that's a dead end. And if you know anything about how these guys operated, the gunmen were really just hired guns. I mean, they weren't movers or players. They were getting paid, and so I don't really care about who the shooters were. I don't think there's any way to know that unless somebody who's still in the plot, who's still alive, he decides to confess. But so that's my essential scenario on the assassination.
Thank you for that. I have a few questions. First of all, you said that the Zapruder film, according to you, was altered. My question will be, why not just destroy the film? Instead of, going to great pains, trying to altering it. Why not just destroy the film? Why did they try to alter it?
Well, okay, here's where, actually, that's a great question. I'm really glad you asked that, okay? Because here's where I think it's important to understand that the plot was not an all-powerful, omnipresent, where they had people everywhere and they controlled everything. I think there were lots of things that they overlooked, that the things that came up that they hadn't anticipated. Now, plus, most of the people who were involved in the investigation weren't in on the plot, had no knowledge of it. They were federal agents who were doing their job. Now, Zapruder, of course, I mean, let's just on that scenario. Okay, so if they were gonna just destroy the film, they would have to get Zapruder to agree to it. His whole family knew he'd been there. Other people knew he'd been there. They saw him taking the movie. He appears in other photos, and so the natural question would be, okay, so where's his film? And then they would have to have some kind of plausible story as to how it. So they would have had to say, well, it got destroyed when we were processing it. And so, but the problem was that the Cartha DeLoach of the FBI, he saw the film early on. See, I don't think the plotters got their hands on the film until after it had already been seen by Dan Rather. It had already been seen by Cartha DeLoach. Okay. And so, at that point, it would have been really difficult to just destroy the film and, you know, act like, you know, that's it, it's over. But I think that now, of course, the film was suppressed for many years. I think the reason it was suppressed was that, you know, that the people who had edited, that the plotters saw it and said, this still is not acceptable. This still shows too much stuff that we don't want seen. And so that's why you know, the feds went to great efforts to not release the film. So I think that's why it wasn't destroyed. Now there were other films that were destroyed or that were damaged, but I don't think they could do it in the case of the Zapruder film, just because the FBI in Dallas they became aware early on of its existence. He had copies made, and it was out of their control. So then they had to do the best they could, and, you know, so that's why now one of the big things that we learned thanks to the ARRB is that the film was diverted to the it's called NPIC, the National Photographic Interpretation Center. It was an arm of the CIA. It was diverted to MPIC and also to a CIA contracted lab up in New York, and this was off the record at the time. You have the official chain of custody, which says nothing about these diversions. Okay, it's according to the chain of custody, that film never went to NPIC. It never went to the Hawkeye Works up in New York. We only found this out years later, after the 1990s, thanks to the ARRB. And so you have to ask yourself, okay, why was the film sent to NPIC? And now I happen to have worked. I worked for an agency that used to be NPIC. It's called NGA, the National Geospatial Intelligence Agency. That's our founding organization, or the organization that we evolved from, was NPIC. And so, and then the ARB was able to interview some of the technicians who saw the film at MPIC, and their recollection of what it showed is very different from what we now see in the film.
Okay. Now, thank you for that. You said that you do not know, or you don't pretend to know, or you don't claim to know who fired the shots, because if they were hired guns, obviously, or professionals, obviously, they didn't leave their name, and of course, you don't know who they were. Okay, fine.
Yeah,
I'm that's fine with me. My question will be, okay, you don't know who, but where were they? What position were they firing from? That's my first question. How many were there? And a very important follow-up question: was there someone firing from the 6th floor? And if there was, could it have been Oswald himself?
okay, I'll start with the last one first. I think there's a compelling evidence that Oswald was never on the 6th floor at the time of the shooting, that he actually left the floor much earlier. He was seen downstairs on the 1st and 2nd floor. Now, this evidence was suppressed. Now, there's a great summary of this evidence in Oliver Stone's new JFK documentary, and he does they do a very good job on this. There's a whole book on it. Well, actually, there are a couple of books that examine the evidence in the Warren Commission, how they went in and altered the transcripts of the witnesses and things like that. But Oswald was seen on the 1st and 2nd floors. at the time of the shooting, he was in the lunchroom. And anyway, so but yes, I think that there were shots fired from the sixth floor sniper's nest. I think there was more than one person seen on the sixth floor. We have good eyewitness accounts of more than one person on that sixth floor. But again, these were ignored, or they were dismissed as errors. Well, you know, the witnesses, they were seeing things, or they weren't reliable. So I think that there was a gunman on the sixth floor, and I think he had a spotter, which is that standard procedure. You know, you're going to have somebody, if you're shooting, okay, you know, oftentimes you'll have a spotter, or you'll just have somebody to help you. Okay. I think that there's really strong evidence that there was a gunman on the grassy knoll. Some witnesses saw a man running away from the fence after the shots were fired. There's photographic evidence of a cloud of gun smoke. I mean, there wasn't any kind of smoke that could have been hanging over some of the trees along the fence on the grassy knoll. The steam pipes were way too far away to have caused that cloud. And you know, it wasn't motorcycle exhaust, because you'd see it in some other films if that were the case. And you had a lot of witnesses who were near the knoll or on the knoll, who were certain that shots had been fired from behind that fence on the knoll. I think that the acoustical evidence is valid. I think now, of course, the acoustical scientists of the HSCA, they were rushed due to a time crunch, but I think that their work has held up. I think that the critiques of their work don't stand up under scrutiny. Now, I don't claim to be an acoustical expert, but since I was in signals intelligence, I do know a little bit more than the average Joe about amplitude and modulation and all this stuff, and how it works. And I'm wholly unpersuaded by the attacks on the acoustical evidence. A lot of it's really amateur stuff. These people clearly had no idea what they were even talking about, and I don't even think they had actually read the acoustical experts' reports and the other information that they filed to understand how they came across this, how they developed the evidence. There are some remarkable correlations, like you have windshield distortions on the film. I mean, on the audio tape, the Dallas, it's called the dicta belt. You have distortions caused by a windshield, and the committee even did tests to establish the acoustic signature of a windshield distortion, and it happens at just the right time when the motorcycle would have been in position to have that happen. That's just evident. I don't think you can just brush that aside. That's really powerful stuff. The time movement correlations between the site tests that were done in Dealey Plaza by the acoustical folks, by the select committee, and the dicta belt are remarkable. The odds that they are a coincidence are just astronomical, like 1 in 100,000. It's just really unlikely that this all happened. It's just a coincidence. And you have the presence of an N wave on the dicta belt, and you not only have the N wave, but you also have the echoes and other things with the N wave in the right sequence for the right duration, and that to me is powerful scientific evidence. I don't see how you can ignore that. Okay, so now you asked me. Okay, that was a long answer to. Okay, where were the shooters? So I think there was a gunman in the sixth floor window. I think there was a gunman on the grassy knoll. And I think there was a gunman in the Dow Tex building
Okay.
on the lower floor. There may have been another gunman. Now, these guys would, okay, they would often have a decoy shooter
Mm-hmm.
just to confuse any subsequent investigation, that they would have somebody who was not even aiming at the target, but he would fire some shots just to confuse, just to throw a monkey wrench into things. That may have happened. I mean, I don't know, because again, I since I don't know exactly who hired the gunman and who they were, I don't, so see, I don't know if the CIA delegated this to the mafia. If they said to the mafia, okay, look, you guys hire the shooters, you place them, you take care of this. Okay, this is, I don't know if it was that. I don't know if it was CIA folks who were involved. If it was CIA folks, they would have been a lot more sophisticated in how they did this. It would not surprise me. I'm purely speculating here if one of the gunmen had a silencer, so that you couldn't know he was shooting. But again, I don't know. This is pure speculation. So, but as far as the Daltex building is concerned, there was a mafia guy arrested right after the shooting. He was coming out of the building. His name was Eugene Hale Brading. Now he was arrested because the police thought he was acting suspicious. Okay, this was right after the shooting, and he was apprehended. He was taken down, but then he was let go.
Mm-hmm.
But I find it very interesting. I mean, just if it was a coincidence, it was a heck of a coincidence that a guy associated with the mafia happens to be walking out of a building where there were witnesses who said they heard shots from the Daltex building. Okay, and there's Harold Weisberg identified a photo that appears to show a man who was watching the motorcade from the stairwell, the outside stairs of the Daltex building. He appears to react to something, like he's startled by something near him, and he was on the lower floor. So I would say that I think that there were the three locations. I'm certain there was a gunman in the 6th floor window, because the acoustical evidence leaves no doubt. But now it's interesting. The acoustical evidence also, if you read it properly, you could indicate a shot from the Daltex building, because the Daltex building was right by the book depository building, and I think there was a shot from the grassy knoll. So those three spots, and then maybe a fourth shooter, but where, I don't know. I mean, maybe the roof of the county records building, although I'm not sure that the trajectory of that shot works. I don't know.
Okay, well, I would say it's more or less, at least the theory or the idea of triangulation of crossfire.
Correct.
That
Yep.
Jim Morse mentioned in his book. Okay, so my question is then, what do you think of David Lifton's theory? He was a critic of the Warren Commission conclusions, and in his book, he said there were only shots from the front. So you're saying he's mistaken in his conclusions then?
Yeah, I think he got that wrong, and I also think he was wrong about when the body alteration occurred. He thinks it happened on the plane. I think that's extremely unlikely, just because of the mechanics of it. Now they had time to switch the body out of the ceremonial casket into a shipping casket. They had time to do that, but alter the body, I think that's just impossible. Now, along this line, it's very interesting. One of the important things that we learned from the ARB is that JFK's body arrived at Bethesda in a military shipping casket. It was a gray, cheap shipping casket. And we have this from multiple sources, independent sources. In fact, there's a funeral home document, one of the funeral home gaolers, which handled it, that in one of their documents specifically states it came in a shipping casket. Now, there's no way that anyone who worked with a funeral home would confuse a shipping casket with a ceremonial casket. Now, the casket that they placed the body in Dallas was a ceremonial casket, very ornamental, very fancy. Okay, that no one is going to describe that as a shipping casket. So as for Lifton, yes, I think he was wrong on when the body alteration occurred. I think that Doug Horn is right on target, that it was done just before the autopsy. And we do have some anecdotal evidence that suggests that happened. And I think he was wrong in assuming that all the shots came from the front.
Okay.
Now, okay. I mean, he got a lot of things right. I think his research was very important. He uncovered a great deal of evidence that at some point the body, somebody must have done something to the body. But I just think he got it wrong in terms of when that was done.
Okay, fair enough. How can you explain, well, what's your take on it, but how can you explain the Tippit murder? Who did it, if it's not Oswald? Maybe it was, and if it was him, why would he do that if he was not guilty of Kennedy's assassination? What's the link between the two?
Okay. I will admit that to this day, in my own mind, I am not certain about Oswald's role in the Tippit shooting.
Okay.
I will say this. Okay, it's very suspicious that. Okay. Let me back up. So, I think there are three possibilities. One is that Tippit was hunting for Oswald. I mean, he had no business being in Oak Cliff. Was not his assigned area. Okay, you can listen. You can see the transcripts. All the cars were ordered into downtown Dallas. Yet suddenly he's ordered to go into Oak Cliff. There was already a car assigned to Oak Cliff. Okay, and just think of the cosmic coincidence that of all the areas of Dallas he could have been sent to, he was sent to Oswald's neighborhood. I mean, that, Lady Luck is normally not quite that good. And plus, if you look at his behavior, which means documented, no doubt about it, nobody denies this. Even Del Myers admits it. He was waiting at the Glocko gas station, which if you were going to watch for a car coming from Dallas to Oak Cliff, that's where you'd go. And he was sitting there parked. He didn't report it. Okay. And he didn't answer. He didn't answer any dispatcher calls. He should have, but he didn't. And then all of a sudden he speeds off from there. And he speeds off at right about the same time that Oswald, according to as best we can reconstruct it from the housekeeper at his place, that right around the same time he leaves his boarding house. My, what a coincidence. But now Oswald, according to the lady there, the last time she saw him, he was standing at the street. Now, at the corner, and in order to get to the point where Tippit was shot, he would have had to have gotten a ride. Unless he just ran. Okay. So Tippit speeds off from the Glocko gas station. Then he's seen in a record shop, Top 10 Records. He runs in, he makes a call, he lets it ring several times, he hangs up, and then he runs out. Now, he could have used the police had phones in various spots that they could use. All right. Yet he didn't use police phone. He goes in and uses a phone in a record shop. He's in a big hurry. What's going on? I mean, what, you know, so I think if, you know, he was calling a contact to say, okay, where's the guy? Where's the guy I'm looking for? Okay. Well, what's going on? And so then he dashes out of the record shop, and then just a few minutes later, he's dead. Now, so I see three possibilities here. Okay, I see one. Now, I think in all three, Tippett was hunting for Oswald. I think he was in Oak Cliff because he was the guy who was supposed to take out Oswald. Okay, and so I think either it was Oswald, and Oswald just got the drop on him. You know, he was faster. He shot Tippett before Tippett could shoot him. Okay, and if you read the witness accounts of the shooting, one, there was no reason that Tippett would have stopped Oswald or whoever it was. Okay, now I also think it's possible. That okay, we know that there was an Oswald double, somebody who looked an awful lot like Oswald in Dallas. He was seen by many people. It's possible that the Oswald double, that he was the one there. And see, again, okay, sometimes even the most carefully planned operations can have royal screw-ups. And I mean, I was in the military. We know from abundant history that even the most carefully planned military operations can have just mind-blowing gaffes. Somebody missed something, or somebody got the wrong information. They weren't where they were supposed to be, or they didn't know about this other part of the plan. So it's possible. I think it's possible that those who sent Tippett to hunt Oswald weren't aware that he might not be going after the real Oswald. He might be going after the double. Okay. And but again, now I know that it sounds wild. I freely acknowledge, but again, we have a lot of information of intelligence operations that used lookalikes. Okay, so it's not like it's never happened before. But I do agree that it sounds a little bit like, oh boy, now you're going off the deep end. And so it was either the real Oswald recognized, since, okay, there was no reason for Tippett to have stopped this guy by all the witness accounts. Well, at least the first ones. Now, a couple folks later changed their testimony. But if you go by the initial accounts, there was no reason in the world for Tippett to have stopped Oswald. The description of the sixth floor shooter that went out bore no resemblance to Oswald. And so there was, I mean, just why would he suddenly stop this guy, who by all accounts was just walking along, doing nothing out of the ordinary? So anyway, so he stops this guy. Now, according to Helen Markham, they had a friendly conversation at first. The guy came over, leaned down to the window. They were chatting. She said that nothing looked out of the ordinary. And then suddenly he gets Tippett. He gets out of his car, and the guy shoots him. All right. Now, the ballistics evidence is a mess. And if this had gone to court and you had a genuine judge, a genuine trial where they're following the rules of evidence, There's no way that they could have convicted Oswald. I mean, even if they thought he did it, on the evidence they had. Now, there is some evidence that actually Oswald entered the theater where he was later apprehended at around 107, which was well before, this was. So if that's the case, he definitely wasn't the guy who shot Tippit.
Okay.
The description of Tippit's killer. Again, you had some witnesses who changed their stories. All right, after they were re-interviewed, okay, or after they had talked to friends. Like there was a guy named William Smith. He told a friend that he had seen the shooting, and he said the guy looked nothing like Oswald. Well, this came to the attention of the police. He was interviewed, and then he decided, oh, well, I was wrong. Yes, it did look like Oswald. He did look like Oswald. Helen Markham originally described the shooter as having bushy hair and a ruddy complexion. Not even, I mean, Oswald did not have bushy hair, flat hair, straight hair, and he had nothing resembling a ruddy complexion. She also said he was heavy set, and Oswald was very slender. And so that's my now.
Okay.
Another possibility, and I think there might be something to this, is that the shooting actually had nothing to do with Oswald. That this was something that Tippit had been having an affair with a lady, and that her husband shot him. I think that, and then immediately when Tippit was shot, they decided to use that. Well, let's blame that on Oswald. That'll make it seem all the more obvious. Well, if he'd shoot a cop after Kennedy was shot, obviously he was guilty. But honestly, still in my own mind, I am just not certain about if Oswald, if he was the shooter, or if it was the double, or if it was an incident that involved other people not related to the assassination, and they decided to pin it on Oswald later.
Okay.
Yeah. I should add just one more thing. If you've ever heard there's a form of lie detector called VSA, voice stress analysis.
Mm-hmm.
And Oswald's denial of shooting anybody was subjected to VSA analysis, and it indicated that he was telling the truth. Now, I had occasion to have some experience with VSA, and in my career in military intelligence, VSA is very reliable because the person doesn't know. I mean, you can do a VSA and they don't even know that they're being polygraphed. They have no idea. And so there's a lot less opportunity for deception. Okay. Even by a trained agent who's trained in ways of, hopefully he can defeat the polygraph. You do certain, well, anyway. But there was an analyst who subjected Oswald's when he was being interviewed at the police station, and he said, "I didn't shoot anybody." Mm-hmm. But now see, and the nice thing about VSA, you can after you have established a control line, okay, where he's telling the truth, okay, so when he's telling the truth, the readings look like A. Okay, and then when you can take that and then analyze it and compare it to, okay, well, so what do the readings show when he says that I didn't shoot anybody? Okay, and so and he made a number of other statements when he was interviewed that we know were true. Okay, and so he could compare those, and that VSA analysis showed he was being truthful when he said, "I didn't shoot anybody."
That's interesting. Okay. All right. Okay. I didn't know that. I wasn't aware of that. Okay. At some point, you mentioned a lookalike.
Yes.
So I'm thinking, what do you think? What's your take on John Armstrong to Oswald's theory?
Okay. Oh boy.
It's a step further, but yeah.
Yes. I think there's something to it. Okay, but I don't go along with all of his theories.
Okay.
Flowing from, okay, I mean, he's uncovered a lot of interesting evidence, valid evidence, checks out. But I don't buy all of his conclusions, all the conclusions that he makes from that evidence. Now, it's become very clear that somebody was impersonating Oswald in Mexico City.
Oh, you think so?
Oh, definitely. I mean, we have the transcripts of the call that the fake Oswald made to the Soviet embassy. His Russian was terrible, but yet we know Oswald spoke fluent Russian. In fact, he spoke Russian so well that when Marina Oswald met him, she wasn't sure if he was American or if he was from another part of the Soviet Union. There are indications that he went to the Army's Language Institute, which I attended. I went to DLI. At the time, it wasn't called DLI, but the Defense Language Institute. We know from a disclosed document from the Warren Commission that the Warren Commission found out that Oswald had attended the language school in Monterey. Now, I can tell you, as someone who was in the intelligence field, you didn't go to that school unless you were in intelligence. Okay, that's the only reason you would be there. You would have had to have been involved in some kind of intelligence work in order to be sent as a Marine to the language. It wasn't just the Army's language school. All the services. That's where they were sending their the military people to learn languages. And so there's a document where J. Lee Rankin, he talks about that they're trying to find out something about why he was at the language school. Now that right there to me, like, oh wow, okay, he was in intelligence. He wasn't just any ordinary Marine. And then of course, so anyway, and the people who dealt with Oswald at the Cuban consulate initially, that they described a person who did not look like Oswald. I should clarify. Okay, I don't think that. I think that there was an Oswald lookalike in Dallas. I'm not sure if the person who was impersonating him in Mexico City looked a whole lot like him, because the descriptions that the workers at the consulate, that the Cuban consulate gave of him initially, before they were pressured and they changed their stories, but initially, well, at least some of them did. But initially, they described him in terms, it did not look like Oswald. But I find very compelling the transcript of the call of Oswald to the Soviet embassy in Mexico City, where the CIA translator, he made a note on the transcript that this guy's Russian was horrible, was almost unintelligible. Okay, whereas we know Russian, but yet he said he was Lee Harvey Oswald, the phone call. Okay, but yet he spoke horrible Russian, whereas we know Oswald spoke very good Russian.
Okay. Okay, that is interesting too. You know that it's been 61 years, and so many books have been written. And you yourself said that, especially in the 90s, before the internet, you bought books and you wrote books. But not everybody agrees. I mean, that is an understatement. And some people have theories and have had ideas that were contrary to what other authors had in mind. What do you think of that? What do you think of the research community and the many theories, and why are there so many theories, sometimes conflicting, and which one would you say are better than others, let's say?
Yeah.
It's not an easy question, maybe, but
Well, I mean, on any, well, not on any, but on a lot of controversial cases, you have a wide range of opinions.
mhm.
Most of the people who have researched the assassination have concluded at the minimum that there was more than one gunman. Now some think Oswald was one of the gunmen. I used to think that for a while.
Okay.
And then you have those, of course, who think it was Oswald and nothing else. You have those who think that Oswald was the only gunman, but that he was part of a conspiracy.
Mhm.
Walter Cronkite of CBS News actually expressed that view, that he still thought Oswald was the only gunman, but he wasn't at all sure anymore that he acted alone. Just because of all the connections that the House Select Committee found that Oswald had, all if anything, they proved that this guy was no loner. He was certainly no loner, and he was no nut. He was highly intelligent, and he was quite a reader. And of course, you have to, in order to learn to speak Russian. I mean, I learned to speak Arabic and Hebrew. Russian is one of the hardest language for an English speaker to learn, and so you have to have a high degree of intelligence to become fluent in a language like Russian.
Mhm.
And so, and then you have those who they think that JFK was killed because he was gonna unilaterally abandon the Vietnam War after the election. He was gonna just let the communists win. I think that's fantasy. It's based on really bad evidence, and it's really, I think it does a lot of harm to the case for
Mhm.
conspiracy when you have people going around floating those theories. That it, and I mean, they have these tremendous elaborate. They posit this tremendous, huge, elaborate conspiracy. And I agree it was a powerful conspiracy, but I don't think it was as powerful or as big as some think it was. And they have Ed Lansdale and Dealey Plaza. Ed Lansdale admired JFK, thought highly of him. He mourned his death. I mean, it's just ridiculous. But again, this is what L. Fletcher Prouty.
Mhm.
This was one of the crackpot things he came up with, because he used to work with Lansdale. He should have known better, but he used to work with Lansdale, and so he claimed that he identified Lansdale in some photos. And of course, other people have looked at those photos, have seen no resemblance. The man in the photos wears glasses. Lansdale was never known to wear glasses. And there's just no reason to think Lansdale had anything to do with this. I mean, he just, but anyway, I mean, you have those in the community who convinced, I mean, again, and this was the thesis of Oliver Stone's first JFK movie. Now in the movie, they don't name Lansdale, but specifically, but they have a part where they show like his nameplate on his desk, and it's, he's an Air Force general. And of course, Prouty, in his books, he said it was Lansdale. Lansdale was a prime mover and all this stuff. I just think that's just crazy talk, really. I'm not trying to use hyperbole, but I just think it's just so ridiculous.
Okay.
And I think that the House Select Committee on Assassinations did a lot of really good work. I agree there were some flaws. I mean, they pulled some punches. They were on a time crunch. They were misled by the CIA. Well, by the parts of the CIA that they dealt with. And of course, G. Robert Blakey, who he was the chief counsel for years, he staunchly defended the CIA. But when he became aware of the ARB stuff and the fact that George Joannides was not who he said he was, he pretended, he was the CIA's liaison to the House Select Committee, and it turned out that he was, he should have been one of the targets of the investigation. And Robert Blakey in 2014, I believe, he published a scathing letter, which, I mean, you would have, before that, you would have never dreamed that he would have said the things he said in that letter. And I thought it was so noteworthy that I included the letter in my book, A Comforting Lie, because Blakey it really opened his eyes. And he's an honest guy. I think he's an honest guy. I think he did the best he could. And a lot of the evidence that the ARB released was HSCA stuff, and that stuff was obtained thanks to the HSCA, thanks to Blakey, thanks to the other staffers, Eddie Lopez, all those guys. So anyway, I don't insist. I mean, I don't care if another author thinks that Oswald was one of the gunmen. I mean, if he thinks he was a part of the conspiracy, which he may have been. I mean, he may have been told that this was going to be a training event, because, I mean, definitely the fact that he fled the TSBD. Okay, so I think he realized something. I mean, I think that definitely indicates that he was in some way involved. Okay, because he was clearly in flight at that point. Okay, and you don't just run away if you have had nothing to do with anything. But yes, there are a lot of opinions about the assassination. A lot of theories. A lot of authors don't agree. I think that the general consensus among a pretty substantial majority of the people who have researched the case is that there was a conspiracy of some kind. They don't, we don't agree on all the particulars about it, but that there was some kind of plot. There was more than one gunman, So I mean, you have those who passionately argue that the Zapruder film is pristine, that it could not have been altered, which I think is flatly untrue. I think they definitely. I think it's been established that they had the technology back then to do the kind of editing that we're talking about. And you have those who, still adhere to the original Oliver Stone version, although, Oliver Stone himself has distanced himself from Fletcher Prouty, which is very interesting. But yet, you have a lot of researchers who still hold Prouty in high regard. They still cite him and quote him. I mean, this guy said some truly ludicrous stuff. He suggested that the secret team assassinated Princess Diana, He suggested, he was usually, he would phrase it in a way that you could always say, well, he didn't actually flatly say it. He said, well, it might have happened that way. But to even entertain that idea, he suggested that Churchill might have poisoned FDR. I mean, that's just
okay. I wasn't aware of that.
Bizarre. I mean, and yet and plus, I mean, he for years he was associating with anti-Semites, Holocaust deniers. He appeared at two conferences sponsored by Holocaust denying groups, Liberty Lobby and the IHR. And we know this. I mean, we have the programs. He was one of the speakers. He wrote a letter to the editor of the IHR journal, which, I mean, is a Holocaust denying journal, praising the IHR. I mean, are you kidding me? I mean, how can anybody use this guy? It's embarrassing. I mean, if Gerald Posner had all of these sleazy associations with anti-Semites and Holocaust deniers that the Fletcher Prouty did, every conspiracy theorist would be screaming bloody murder. Mm-hmm. But a lot of them, not all by any means, many conspiracy theorists don't accept Prouty. They acknowledge he was a crackpot. They acknowledge that he said many, just bizarre things. But you do have quite a few who still defend him. But those folks who defend him, I mean, if Gerald Posner had the same associations, had done the same things that Prouty did, they'd be screaming bloody murder. Mm-hmm. But
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. I know that Len Osanic was a fan of Fletcher Prouty. Now, what do you think of Jim Garrison from New Orleans? His investigation and
yeah. Well, I think the truth is somewhere between the extreme of he did everything right, he was correct in everything, he was a saint, and those who say he was a complete fraud, and the other extreme of saying he was a complete fraud, mm-hmm. He got nothing right, he found nothing, it was all fantasy. Okay, I think the truth is somewhere in the middle. Mm-hmm. It is true that at times he did fabricate, he did lie, he exaggerated. He did
really fabricate?
Yes, fabricate. I think he fabricated evidence. I think he fabricated the entry at the VIP lounge where it had it was the last line on the entry, and I think it was faked. I don't buy the thing about the claim that when Clay Shaw was booked, that he gave that he said that one of his aliases was Clem Bertrand. I mean, he'd had to be out of his mind to admit that when he was booked. So I think that was faked. I think that Garrison made a lot of mistakes. Mm-hmm. I think he was essentially on the right track. I'm not, some of the evidence that he presented, I just don't buy. I don't buy. As an example, Speisel. He had a witness named Speisel, who I think the guy was clearly nuts, but he put him on the stand, and then he got destroyed under cross-examination. Yeah. And so I think that Garrison uncovered some valid evidence, some very important valid evidence. He was the one that got the Zapruder film, and he made some bootleg copies. And that was how, at least, it began to partially be available on a very small scale. But his development of the evidence of Oswald and Ferry in Clinton and in Jackson, I think that's very valid. The HSCA interviewed all those witnesses, at least those who were still alive, and they found them credible. And so that was very important, because I think that was a part of the sheep dipping making a cover for Oswald to make him seem like he was a Marxist, that he was he was violently anti-Cuban. I mean, he was violently pro-Cuban, pro-Castro, and I think that was a part of it. But I'm some of the witnesses he produced, I'm just not sure about them. I mean, he was up against a machine. I mean, he was the feds were doing all they could to obstruct his investigation. Some of the witnesses he had, that they were either murdered or they disappeared. They were beyond his reach. So my short answer is I think he was on the right track, but I think I think that he exaggerated and fabricated at times. I think he got some things wrong. And so I don't think he was perfect and entirely right, but I don't think he was a fraud and never right either.
Okay, but put it simply, was Clay Shaw Clay Bertrand?
I think he probably was.
Mm.
Okay, I think he probably was. I don't think that's as important as the evidence of Ferry and Oswald and Bannister and et cetera, and the fact that they were in Clinton and Jackson together.
Mm.
And I think that was a really key item of evidence to find, and I think it checks out. But then here again now, Garrison had a nasty habit of he would pad sometimes, not always, but sometimes he would exaggerate, or he would pad what some of the witnesses were saying. But when the HSCA went and re-interviewed all those folks, they came away very impressed with them, and they all corroborated what they had originally said.
Mm-hmm.
And I think Garrison did a great job in terms of getting the Zapruder film available, even though it wasn't really available until 1975 when Geraldo, he showed it on national television. And until then, it had been shown to a few audiences on college campuses here and there, but the vast majority of Americans had never seen it, had no idea what was in it. I mean, it is true that the Warren Commission printed the frames of it, but that's it's one thing to see frames of a movie. It's another thing to see the frames put into the movie where you see it, in motion. And of course, we also know that the Warren Commission switched a couple of the frames to hide the backward movement of the head in the headshot.
And they were black and white.
And they said that was a printing error. Yes, and they were black and white.
Mm-hmm. Two other questions. You mentioned your book earlier, the title of which is A Comforting Lie. Can you tell us a few things about your book and the title itself?
Yes. Well, the title, A Comforting Lie, I think that the lone gunman theory was and is a comforting lie.
Okay.
That it's a lie. I mean, a comforting lie it is a lie that you tell someone because you think that the truth would just be too harmful to them. They couldn't handle it. It would be too distressing, too upsetting. And so I think that the lone gunman theory from the get-go was a comforting lie. Mm-hmm. I mean, I think it was also part of a cover-up. They didn't want to admit what had happened, but I think that it was designed to put the American people at ease that, oh no, this was just some lone nut, you know, all by himself. He had no, you know, no accomplices, no connections with anybody sinister. This was just he was just a nut. It was just a nut job, and he shot Kennedy. Although it's interesting that they could never identify a motive, because by all accounts, and everybody who knew Oswald said he liked JFK, and so they could never come up with a plausible motive. I mean, they said you know, one theory was he was seeking attention. Well, it's odd then that he denied the shooting. I mean, usually, you know, other guys who have done that have like, yeah, I did it. Here's why, you know. But anyway.
So why was JFK assassinated then? Big question.
Yeah. Well, I think that this was I think that several motives were in play. I think one of the big ones was revenge for the Bay of Pigs.
You mentioned that earlier.
Yeah, I think that was a powerful for some of the plotters. I think their main motive was revenge. They just wanted to get this guy because he'd sold them out. And revenge is a powerful motive. I think you had the mafia, whom JFK and RFK were in the process of destroying. I mean, they were literally in the process of dismantling the mafia. The mafia had never seen anything like this in their existence. And so JFK and RFK were an existential threat. I mean, JFK was threatening their very existence. And so they, it's no secret we have lots of tape on how upset the mafia, how furious the mafia leaders were over what he was doing to them. And so they would have had a motive of survival. Okay, I mean, it was either you, if we don't get you, you're going to get us. I think that you had those among the plotters who felt that he was gonna sell us out to the Soviet Union. He was going to sign some dangerous arms control treaties. Even though, I mean, if you look at the one treaty he signed, it was very reasonable, and he was very tough in negotiations. I mean, he was not about to do that, but there were those in the defense world who even the Test Ban Treaty, they viewed that as just sheer folly and treason. It just is completely unacceptable. And they feared that I think some of them feared he was going to he was going to unilaterally disarm the United States and just let the UN run the world. But so why was he killed? Yeah, so I think revenge, in terms of the anti-Castro side of the equation of the plot, those who were involved in the Bay of Pigs, the efforts to depose Fidel Castro, and they felt that he had sold them out. And then you had the mafia who viewed him as an existential threat. And then, I think you had elements in the defense and CIA who felt that he was a danger to the country, to its survival, that he was going to sell us out with these crazy, I mean, in their minds, crazy, fatally flawed arms controlled agreements and all this stuff.
Okay. What, to your mind, in your opinion, what can be done that hasn't been done yet for the research community to gather and give the public or the media, the mainstream media, or whoever, the truth, or what you consider to be the truth, at least, that there was a conspiracy, and that has been hidden, for 61 years. What can be done now that hasn't been done yet?
Well, there are still quite a few files that have not been released relating to the JFK assassination. Now, it's interesting. Some of those files are about William King Harvey, whom just about everybody has identified as a suspect for obvious reasons. So hopefully Trump will keep his promise and will release all the rest of the files. He said that the first time, he didn't do it. He got talked out of it. Hopefully he's learned his lesson. I don't know, but so one thing that can be done is to release all of the remaining files. Another thing would be to have objective, honest scientists re-examine the acoustical evidence. And I think if that were done, it would confirm the acoustical evidence. Now, this was done in part by Josiah Thompson a few years ago, where he got some acoustical scientists at BBN, which was one of the firms that had done the original, helped do the original acoustical research. He got some scientists from them, and they confirmed some key parts of the acoustical evidence, and this is in his book, his recent book, Last Second in Dallas. I think also it would help if we had some honest, objective photographic experts examine the Zapruder film. I think that would confirm the mountain of research done so far that shows that yes, it's been altered. And I think it would be helpful to have a rifle test where you go and get people who had the same skill level and experience that Oswald had, because of course people who knew him in the Marines said he had no interest in guns. He didn't keep his own weapon clean, he struggled at the range. As I mentioned, his best day at the range, he barely qualified in the second category of sharpshooter. But to go and get 10 guys who qualified at that level in either the Army or the Marine Corps, and who have had limited shooting practice since then, because by all accounts, Oswald, if he did any shooting at all, it wasn't much after he left the Marine Corps. It's interesting, when he went to Russia, he was in a gun club, and some investigators interviewed some of the people in his gun club, and they all said he wasn't a good shot. He was a poor shot. And have them use a Carcano, and in the same, so have a moving target in a cramped space, because remember, he was supposedly firing from that 6th floor window where you had the window only halfway open. He had some pipes around him. He had boxes around him. Even for somebody as small and slender as he was, that would have been cramped. That would have been a cramped condition, and that makes it harder to fire. Every rifle test that has ever been done, they've never included those conditions of a half open window, of a cramped space, and all that. It's never been duplicated. Have those conditions duplicated in a test, and I would bet you good money that none of those guys would even come close to doing what Oswald allegedly did. Now, on that point, I meant to mention this earlier. When I was in the Army, I went to a training course on an Air Force base, and one of the of the guys in my class, he was an Army sniper. And I won't name his name right now. But well, frankly, because I can't remember it, but I have it in email. I mean, in some old posts, because I posted some things about this in news groups at the time. But he was an Army sniper, and he said that when he went to sniper school, that the subject of Oswald's shooting feat, alleged shooting feat, came up, and that all the instructors, all of his sniper instructors at the sniper school, said there was no way that that Oswald that he did what he allegedly did. And he said that they tried to do it. He said that one of the things they would do in their training, just as a side, it wasn't on the official curriculum for the training, but that they did the best they could to simulate the shooting. And he said that none of the instructors could do it, none of the students could do it. He said he tried, he couldn't do it. So I found that interesting.
Of course, yes, it is interesting. Yeah. Okay. Well, hopefully these things can be done in the future. All right. Is there any anecdote or something you would like to share that you haven't said about, I don't know, a researcher that you would have met, or a witness you would have talked to, or something that you want to share?
Well, we haven't talked about the backyard rifle photos.
Oh, we haven't yet. That's true.
Yeah, we haven't talked about them. And back in the 90s, I interviewed a photographic technician. He had a lot of formal training, and he worked for the National Security Agency at the time. And that was his job. I mean, he was a photographer. And he also did, like, he would process film, he would develop it, all this stuff. He would do prints. And along with him, I interviewed, I don't know, 6 or 7 or 8 professional photographers in addition to him. And so I had just watched the video Fake by Jack White.
Okay. I remember that.
And he and I sat down. It took about 3 hours, and we watched. We went through the video segment by segment. And he said, now there were several things where he said that Jack White he didn't know what he's talking about. He got it wrong. Okay, he said, no, that's wrong. That's not how that works. That doesn't, that's not true. But he definitely agreed with the main conclusion that the photos had been faked. And one of the first things he zeroed in on, which at the time as a layman, I had no idea, but he noticed this right away, that when Jack White mentioned in the video that the backgrounds of the photos were identical. Well, they weren't quite identical. They aren't quite identical, but they're nearly identical. And when the HSCA photographic experts examined the backyard photos, they found microscopic differences between the objects in the background of the photos. And if these photos were taken the way that they were supposedly taken, that would be impossible. Okay. And he zeroed in on that. He said, okay, there's no way that if these photos were taken with a handheld camera, where they're holding it at their belly and you have to depress a lever, to take it, and they're handing it back and forth so he can advance the film, because that was the story, that that Marina would take the photo, she handed the camera to him, he would advance the film, hand it back, and then he'd get back in position. Mr. Me, his name was Brian Me. He said, there's just no way that could happen if these photos were taken the way they were taken. And if you go into the HSCA's report, that part of the report that deals with the authentication of the backyard rifle photos, where they actually give all the measurements of just how tiny these differences are in the distances between the objects in the background of the photos. It's incredible. I mean, they're like just microscopic. And so just imagine in your own mind the odds of, somebody snaps a photo with a cheap handheld camera. This thing was a cheapy camera, Imperial Reflex camera. Okay, very cheap camera. So you snap a photo like this. You hand the camera to Oswald. He advances the film. You walk back. So you would have to assume that every time that they did this, she returned to the exact same position as she was before she handed the camera, because she was standing a ways away from him. She wouldn't have just been able to reach out and hand him the camera. She would have had to step away, or he would have had to step toward her, or both. And so they would have both had to have gone back to the exact same position that they were in for the first photo. All right, because you've got all these angles going, the vertical distance, horizontal distance. Okay, and so Mr. Me, that was one thing he zeroed in on, which actually Jack White doesn't, because I don't think Jack White understood this. I don't think he realized this. He just thought they were identical, which at first glance they look identical. But if you do measurements of them, parallax measurements, you can find very minute differences. So he didn't know this, but then I was aware. Luckily, I was aware of that. I told him about it, and I showed him the measurements, and he was just blown away. Like, okay, there's no way that happened. There's no way these photos were taken the way that they were supposedly taken. So that was one thing he zeroed in on. Also, the variant shadows. I showed him the HSCA's explanation. He dismissed him as bunk. But he dismissed it as bunk. He said that's nonsense. And so I interviewed, now on that issue, I interviewed a bunch of other photographers, and I didn't tell them why I was asking or what case I was talking about. I just said, I'm just trying to understand something. And I said, if you had a doll, and you had it, he's in sunlight, and you took a picture of the doll's head, how would it be that in one picture the shadow would fall straight under the nose, and in another would fall off at an angle? And they said, well, all of them said the only way that could happen is if it was done at different times of the day, or if the person moved drastically. If the person taking the picture moved so that the angle changed. But they said but I said, well, but what if the photos were taken consecutively, from the same spot? They said, well, no, it's impossible. And then there's no way that the shadow would fall in two different spots in that scenario. And it's interesting that one of the experts on the photographic evidence panel, he did his own experiment on variant shadows, and he found the same thing. But yet they still concluded that the photos were authentic. If you look at the photos that they submitted of their experiments to show that this was possible, you can see that the mannequin they used, it wasn't his head wasn't in the same position as the head of the figure in the photos. I mean, it was tilted away from the camera almost sometimes. I mean, it bore no resemblance to what we see of the figure of the head, the figure of the head in the backyard rifle photos. And finally, I found it very interesting that when Oswald was shown these photos, he said, "Okay, that's not. I mean, that's my face, but I didn't. That's not me. It's not me in those photos." And that rings true to me. I mean,
Okay.
sometimes when a person, sometimes when they give an answer like that, it's because they're telling the truth, even though it's the last thing you would say if you were trying to lie, if you were trying to cover up. You would, I mean, he could have come up with any number of other explanations,
Mm-hmm.
but so anyway, that's my take on the
Okay.
plus. I mean, just looking at it logically. I mean,
Uh-huh.
if I were going to go out and kill the president of the United States, and I had some photos taken of myself holding the rifle I was going to use, I'd make sure every last one of those photos and the negatives were burned, were gone. Oswald was the one who told the police where to find the photos. Now, he didn't know they were there. I don't think he knew they were there, but he told them where his stuff was, okay, where they could find all of his belongings. And then, of course, the story of the discovery of the photos is another mess, where you have some really odd discrepancies. But that's where they eventually found the photos, or at least said they did. And so you're like, well, what? Okay, so he goes out. I mean, he has photos taken of himself holding the murder weapon. Okay, and then he tells the police where they can find them. I mean, they just, I'm like, okay, nobody's that stupid. I mean, anyway.
I understand your point. I do understand your point. Okay. Well, interesting too. Well, it is true. I had forgotten to ask about the backyard photos. Is there any point that we didn't cover? Anything you would like to add before we wrap up?
Yes.
Anything I forgot to ask?
Well, I do think that it's important that if the JFK assassination research community wants to be taken more seriously,
Mhm.
we have got to somehow, we have to repudiate those researchers. I'm talking about conspiracy theorists,
Mhm.
those who feel there was some kind of a conspiracy. Okay, when I say the research community, okay,
Mhm.
because I know that not all researchers think there was a conspiracy, but
Mhm.
among those who do, but we have got to repudiate those who also push these crazy 9/11 conspiracy theories. It's just, I mean, it's that. I mean, you have some researchers, and they're very active on the internet, in the education forum and elsewhere, who say that 9/11 was an inside job, that the towers were brought down by controlled demolitions. I mean,
Mhm.
how'd they get the demolitions in there? The buildings were under 24/7 video surveillance, that they would have had to put them. Sometimes they would have had to put them in the columns. Yeah. And they also say that instead of an airliner hitting the Pentagon, it was a missile. And that I mean, just and this really, I mean, if I were Joe Blow and I didn't know anything about the assassination, and I stumbled across a forum where they were talking about it, and I realized that there were that some of the same people who say there's a conspiracy in the JFK case also were peddling the 9/11 conspiracy theories,
Mhm.
I would instantly say, "You're nuts! I'm not believing anything you say." Why should I take you seriously on the Kennedy assassination if you have such horrible judgment on 9/11?
Mhm.
I mean, you've got a few of these folks who think the moon landings were faked. I mean, you know, it's like, it's no wonder that so many journalists and academics, you know, as soon as you start to talk about a JFK assassination plot, they think, oh, yeah, that's the same group that, you know, that buys all this 9/11 craziness. I mean, there are those who even think that John Lennon, I'm not kidding you. I won't say where they've done it, but it's online, and their JFK assassination, the conspiracy theorists. Some of those folks say that John Lennon was assassinated by the military-industrial complex because he was going to lead a new peace movement. I mean, so we need to somehow, I mean, everyone has a right to their own opinion. I totally respect that. And I'm not saying that they should be deplatformed or everything, but we've got to repudiate these people and just say, look, okay, yeah, there's a small group of us. Well, unfortunately, I don't know. It's a group. I don't know how small it is, but there are some who say that. We reject that. That's not us. We don't believe that. That's, you know, and make that clear, and maybe have a forum where you just you don't allow that stuff to be discussed. I mean, you don't allow that stuff to be peddled. Okay, I mean, there are lots of other forums where they can do it, where they're in the moderators. Even some of the moderators are they buy the 9/11 conspiracy theories, and they can go there, they can post it all they want, but have some forum where if a visitor comes, they're not going to find all this craziness. You know, fake moon landings. John Lennon was assassinated. 9/11 was an inside job, and the towers were brought down not by massive airliners and jet fuel hitting them and blowing them up, but because of controlled demolitions. I mean, you know, if I were coming today, if I knew nothing about it and I came into one of those forums and I read something on the assassination by somebody, oh yeah, it seems reasonable. Then I found out that person also says that 9/11 was a job. I would instantly say, okay, forget it. Not buying anything this guy says.
I understand.
Yeah.
Of course. That is true. Oh, that is interesting too. Okay. Yeah. And you're still active on the education forum.
I am. Yeah, I am. I mean, not as active as I used to be, but I still post fairly frequently.
Okay, great. So
Yeah.
people can follow you there. Okay, well, thank you very much for a very interesting interview. I learned a lot. I was happy to listen to you and your take on so many specific items of the Kennedy assassination, which is so rich and rife in all those sides. And, you know, it was very interesting. I enjoyed listening to you, and I thank you for the time that you gave me. But again, I want to thank you very much for the time, and well, we'll be in touch, at least on the
Sure.
education forum. I visit it regularly. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Griffith.
Thank you for your time. Bye.
Bye-bye.